what has made it more complicated now, certainly in the United States, is this whole woke issue. I got an email today to sign a petition at Stanford. Apparently, Stanford has set up an anonymous hotline where you can call in and say, this person has done something against me. They weren't sensitive enough. That's scary. I mean, we've seen that game, that playbook before. East Germany was particularly good at it.
Ultimately, do you feel that social media, and specifically Twitter, because of the weight it has for politicians and academics and journalists, do you feel Twitter overall was a force for good or a force for harm?
Twitter was, I think, very much a force for good. I think the trouble with Twitter is that they need to be smarter with their weighting scheme. So, for example, this is a very easy thing to do, and maybe I should write to Elon Musk about this. Let's say you have 1,000 followers and I have 1,000 followers. And obviously the currency is to try to increase your followers. Now, let's imagine we don't just take how many followers we have. We look at the followers in your 1,000 followers who follow each other. And then if one of your followers follows 10 of your followers, each of them gets a weight of 1/10. So essentially, you basically say that if you follow somebody, you're related to them. So if I had 1,000 followers who had no connection to each other, I would get 1,000 score. And if your 1,000 followers you were part of a group, everyone was connected to everyone else, you would get 1. So you would have an incentive to diversify. I actually will write this on. I thought about this a while ago, and I get a lot of ideas. But a measure like that would instantly force people to diversify.
Mm-hmm.
And diversification is incredibly important. And I was somewhat happy because I think I annoyed Republicans and Democrats more or less equally. And that's fine. I think it's very important. I think diversity is the secret of life.
You mentioned that, and you obviously mentioning the Republicans and the Democrats, and tribalism as well. I think is something that we're seeing more and more, and people being more dogmatic in their views. I just want to go through a couple of tweets recently. One from January 2023, which you posted saying, "Science does not work by being right or wrong. Different ideas are raised for open and broad discussion. Discussion of COVID-19 failed, replaced as it was by tribalism, as in sports and politics. Such tribalism, strongly pushed by leading scientists, has damaged science irrecoverably."
Mm-hmm.
I'm
not sure I believe irrecoverably, because nothing is irrecoverable. But
that's exactly what I wanted to pick up on. Is do you believe that genuine scientific debate has been silenced forever?
Forever is too long a time. I think there needs to be an effort to push back. I think what has made it more complicated now, certainly in the United States, is this whole woke issue. I got an email today to sign a petition at Stanford. Apparently, Stanford has set up an anonymous hotline where you can call in and say, this person has done something against me. They weren't sensitive enough. That's scary. I mean, we've seen that game, that playbook before. East Germany was particularly good at it. So I think, we have to be very scared, very worried. I think the good thing in America is that at least the two tribes balance each other out. If you like, one of my major successes was advising DeSantis in September. He called me up. I was actually flying from Paris to China. He called me up in Paris, and he asked me what he should do. Should he open up? And I said, looking at the numbers, and this is September 20, really early. And, he moved in that direction. Now, if I was a Republican, I would be very excited about this. But I do think this kind of counterbalance. On the other hand, I think Biden has done spectacularly well. I think Biden's actions in Ukraine, in China, and internally have been great. So I'm not party political, and I hope the balances will come out. I think the science.
But it certainly feels as though robust and rigorous debate is not something that anyone to engage in. And I know forever is a very strong
No,
term.
it's still happening. You know, where it's happening now is that the same people who wanted to say how bad COVID is are now trying to calculate the excess death, the impact of COVID, in a way that maximizes it. And there's one easy way to maximize it, and that is to ignore age. So, for example, if you have 100 people and 10% die, and I don't tell you how old they are over a year, and then I tell you these were 5-year-olds, you would, oh my God, this is the most terrible catastrophe in the world. And I say, sorry, I meant 85-year-olds, and say, okay, that's natural death. So you need to look at age-banded death. But there was just recently a very big study accepted by Nature on COVID deaths around the world, completely ignoring age. And that is unacceptable. I mean, it's terrible science. Now, you could say, okay, because age has been discounted, we have a way of correcting. But they didn't even look at the places where there was age to see whether their estimate was different from the age estimate. So I've been publishing now on estimates of damage done by age. And when you do that, you find basically the age profile of COVID is very similar to the age profile of natural death, whether it's comorbidities or old age. So as a result, if you ignore age, you get very crazy numbers. But this has been accepted by Nature as a public. We've tried very hard to write a commentary on this. Our commentary keeps them being rejected.
So why are incredibly smart, well-respected, award-winning scientists ignoring the impact of excess deaths and just focusing on total deaths, and ignoring age brackets and saying that the death of a 90-year-old who might have died with it anyway is the same as the death of a 9-year-old?
I don't know. I think, okay. So I would say partially it's to justify the initial panic. If COVID really is just a month of extra death per year, that is not nice, but it's very small. But if the numbers are much higher, then it's different because So I think the other thing is and here again I'm getting into hot water. I definitely see a war of the generations. Around the time I got my Nobel Prize, I was actually studying. I like to study, although I like numbers. I don't really care where the numbers came from. When I started to study grant awards from the National Institute of Health, which is a big awarding agency in the United States. And to my surprise, I found that as with time, say from 1985 till now, or until then, this was about 10 years ago, the age of the new grantees was getting older and older and older. And I didn't think people were needing more and more experience. And then I discovered that what was happening is that the committees were getting older and older because people were, the whole system had been rebooted after the Second World War. And those people were around. I'm a baby boomer, so I'm guilty. But the baby boomers were getting older and older. And therefore, the average age of the committees were getting older. And therefore, if you're a 60-year-old, a 40-year-old looks the same as a 20-year-old looks to a 40-year-old. And we judge age relative to ourselves. I'm 75 now, and if somebody's 73, they look to me like a baby. And you're about the age of my grandson. Maybe a bit old, pretty one of my youngest sons. Fortunately, I have a big family, so I can take people. So I think that early on, there was this huge fear of old people. And one thing, for example, I think it's okay now, but before Elon Musk took over Twitter, you couldn't say, is the life of a 5-year-old different from the life of an 85-year-old? As you said, a 9 or a 90-year-old. Economists and medical professions have been using years of life lost for a very long time. And essentially there, if somebody dies over the age of expected death, you don't count it. But of course, it's a dear grandfather, it's a dear grandmother. You need to be respectable. But, at the age of 75, if I wanted a new heart, if they gave me one, I would say that's disgraceful. How can you do that? Because it should go to a younger person. A 5-year-old needs to get their 85 years before the 95-year-old gets anything. But it wasn't like this. And now I think it's the case, if you actually do normalize, so this is the tweet I'm about to write, or going to write. If you want to get a very big picture, instead of asking for the excess death per year, let's take a country has a certain amount of life in it. And the amount of life is the number of people times the average age of life expectancy. How many lives left? So let's just say in a typical country, it might be the British population times 40, half the age expectancy. But you can actually do the calculation properly and calculate how many years of life are there. And then you can ask how many years of life were lost by COVID. And in the country where it was worst, which was the United States, it's 1/2000th. Let's just say 1,000th. So the total amount of life, extra life lost from COVID was 1,000th of the amount of life in the country. Okay. Now that might seem like a lot. It turns out 1,000th is a grain of rice from a serving. It's a drop of water, a small drop of water from a drink. If you made a pole 10 meters tall and it was 1 millimeter less, you'd need a really accurate laser to see that. Now, you could ask, okay, well, what did all that cost? Now, we take the world and we ask, how much did the national debt of the world increase in the last 3 years? And it increased by something like, and the national debt right now is $300 trillion. A lot of money. The US national debt increased by something like $5 or $6 trillion. The world national debt probably increased by $30 trillion. So for the saving, potential to avoid the loss of 1,000th, we increased the debt load on the children. Because what is national debt? It's borrowing against the future by 10 times. In the United States, probably by more than 10 times. That's incredible. I mean, that really is so unfair. And, as a baby boomer, I'm very aware of the fact that we think we're special. We think the Rolling Stones were the greatest group ever. We were born at that time. People gave us, as a young scientist in Cambridge, I was given total independence at the age of 20. No one said, no, you still have to study, you have to work. I wrote papers by myself. My first paper to Nature was sole author paper that Francis Crick submitted to Nature for me, and it got it published in 17 days in 1969. And they weren't, they weren't fax machines. So this is the kind of thing that was done for them, and this is what we have to do. So I think I think maybe one good thing is, we have this very strange situation. Old people have become more and more powerful. If you ask what fraction of money, of wealth, is over 65, it's probably gone up 5 or 6 times in the last 40 years. It's gone up incredibly. And as a result, younger people have progressively less. On the other hand, what are we going to do about this? Demography is extremely dangerous. There's been very few young people who've been born. Mm-hmm. You can now start to have, and I wish Margaret Atwood would write a book about this. She's so good at her sort of future visions. But you could imagine a world where we just forget about young people. Instead of worrying about young people supporting us, we have AI-directed robots doing all the dirty work, and we are kept alive for as long as we can afford. Essentially, that's the end of humanity. Right?
Do you feel like that is a viable, legitimate way in which we're headed?
Well, why not? Let's just look. Okay, so, and I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but one effect of COVID has been to throw away all the money on PCR testing, and destroyed economy that could have been a major force in climate mitigation. And again, this, instead of borrowing, I need to look at the numbers again, and I write it. Instead of $30 trillion, I'm just going to say $30 trillion being borrowed against the future for PCR and destroyed economy. We could have borrowed that for alternative energy. We didn't.